Imagine Andrew Carnegie, the man who went from a penniless immigrant boy to the richest human being on earth, could sit down across from you when you were 20 years old, just the two of you. And imagine he could pour everything he learned in 50 years of building an empire into one conversation, before you made the mistakes that cost most people their entire lives. That's what this is. Because here's the tragedy Carnegie understood better than anyone. Almost everything he learned about money, he learned too late to enjoy the full power of it. The lessons were simple. He just wishes someone had told him at 20 instead of 40. So tonight I'm going to give you the 10 wealth lessons Carnegie would go back and teach his younger self, the things he'd grab you by the shoulders and beg you to understand, while you still have the one thing he'd trade his whole fortune for. And I'll tell you now, that one thing is the very first lesson. Stay with me to the end, because the 10th is the one he'd say matters more than all the money in the world. The first thing Carnegie would tell you, before anything else, is that right now, at 20, you are holding the single greatest asset you will ever own, and you can't even see it. It isn't money, it isn't talent, it's time. You have decades in front of you, and time is the one ingredient that turns small amounts of money into fortunes. He learned this the day that first $10 dividend check arrived in the mail, money that came to him without working for it. And the thing that haunted him later was simple math. A small amount of money, put to work early and left to grow, quietly becomes an enormous amount of money, but only if you give it years. Every single year you wait to start is a year you can never buy back, at any price. This is why a person who starts small at 20 often ends up far ahead of someone who starts big at 40. So here's the first question Carnegie would ask you, and he'd stare right at you waiting for the answer. You have this asset right now, today, and it is silently leaking away while you decide whether to begin. What are you actually waiting for? The second lesson he'd teach you is one that would save you years of frustration. Before you chase money, become dangerously good at one thing. When Carnegie was young, he didn't run around looking for get-rich schemes. He taught himself to read telegraph messages by ear, a skill only a handful of people in the entire country had, and suddenly a poor teenager was too valuable to ignore. He understood something most 20-year-olds don't. The world doesn't pay you for being busy, or for wanting money badly. It pays you for being hard to replace. And the fastest way to get rich young isn't a shortcut. It's to become so good at something valuable that people have to come to you and pay your price. So while everyone your age is chasing the next quick thing, he'd tell you to go deep on one rare, valuable skill. That skill becomes the engine for everything else. Ask yourself honestly, is what you're building right now something 1,000 people could do, or are you becoming the person others can't do without? The third lesson is the one he'd be most afraid you'd ignore, because it's the least exciting. Learn to live below your means now, while it's easy, before your income grows. Here's the trap Carnegie watched swallow so many people. They get their first raise, and immediately they spend it. A nicer car, a bigger place, better clothes. Then the next raise, same thing. And no matter how much they earn, they always feel broke, because their spending races ahead of their income for their entire life. Carnegie's secret was almost boring. He kept his lifestyle small on purpose and used the gap between what he earned and what he spent to buy things that made him richer. He'd tell you at 20, when you have almost nothing, is exactly when to build this habit, because it's nearly impossible to learn after you've gotten used to luxury. Every dollar you don't waste trying to look successful is a soldier you can send out to build your freedom. So the question is, are you spending to look rich, or saving to actually become rich? Because you usually can't do both. The fourth lesson is where Carnegie would lean in, because this is the one that changed his life. Buy your first asset as young as you possibly can. He'd explain the difference that most people never learn until it's too late. There are two kinds of things you can spend money on. Things that take money out of your pocket. The gadgets, the toys, the stuff that loses value the second you buy it. And things that put money into your pocket. Ownership, investments, assets that pay you. The poor spend their whole lives buying the first kind. The wealthy, starting young, obsess over the second. Carnegie's entire fortune traces back to that first small ownership stake and the golden egg it laid. He'd tell you not to wait until you're rich to start owning things. You get rich by starting to own things while you're young. It doesn't have to be big, it has to be early. So here's a real one to sit with. What's the first income-producing asset you could own before this year is over? The fifth lesson is one he'd say quietly, because it's uncomfortable, but it shaped his entire rise. The people you surround yourself with will decide who you become. Carnegie built his empire by deliberately surrounding himself with people smarter and better than he was, and he gave them room to lift him higher than he could climb alone. He'd warn you at 20 that the 5 people you spend the most time with are quietly setting the ceiling on your life. The way they think about money, work, and what's possible slowly becomes the way you think too. If everyone around you is comfortable staying exactly where they are, that comfort is contagious, and it will hold you there with them. He'd tell you to seek out people who are further ahead, who make you a little uncomfortable, who stretch what you believe you're capable of. So look around honestly. Are the people closest to you pulling you up toward the person you want to become, or quietly keeping you where you already are? The sixth lesson is one Carnegie would say is invisible now but will follow you for the rest of your life. Guard your reputation from the very first day. When Carnegie was young and had nothing, the one thing he could control was his word, and he made it unbreakable. Years later, bankers handed him fortunes on nothing more than his name, because that name had never once let them down. He'd tell you that at 20 you are quietly building a reputation with every promise you keep or break, every deadline you hit or miss, every time you tell the truth when a lie would be easier. It feels small now, it isn't. In 10 years, your reputation will open doors that money can't buy, or it will quietly close them, and you may never even know which. Character built young becomes trust later, and trust is what unlocks the biggest opportunities in life. So ask yourself, if everyone you dealt with this year described the kind of person you are to work with, would that description make you wealthy or hold you back? The seventh lesson is the one Carnegie credited above almost all others, and he'd be relentless about it. Never stop feeding your mind. As an exhausted boy working in a factory, he spent his one free afternoon a week not resting, but walking across town to borrow books from a man who opened his private library to working kids. He said, for the rest of his life, that everything he became traced back to those borrowed pages. He'd grab you and say that at 20, the cheapest and most powerful investment you will ever make is in your own education. Not the kind that ends with a diploma, but the kind you choose for yourself, every day, for the rest of your life. The world you're climbing keeps changing, and the person who keeps learning always ends up ahead of the person who decided they already knew enough. So when did you last read something that genuinely challenged you? Not to entertain yourself, but to become more capable than you were last month. The eighth lesson is one he'd urge on you precisely because you're young enough to use it. Take your boldest risks now, while you have the least to lose. Carnegie could have stayed a comfortable, well-paid railroad manager for life. Instead, he bet everything on an unproven metal called steel, when most people thought he was a fool. But notice, he studied that risk cold before he took it. He wasn't gambling, he was moving with courage on something he understood. He'd tell you that at 20, with few obligations and decades to recover, you can take smart, calculated risks that will be far scarier to take at 40, with a family depending on you. The safe path feels responsible, but staying too safe your whole life is its own kind of failure. You end up owning nothing because you risked nothing. So what's the calculated risk you keep talking yourself out of, the one you already sense you'll regret not taking? The ninth lesson is the one he'd say kills more dreams than failure ever does. Stop waiting until you feel ready. Carnegie didn't wait for the perfect moment to begin. A barefoot immigrant boy has no perfect moments. He started exactly where he was, as a messenger boy, and simply refused to stay one. He'd tell you the truth that nobody who does anything great ever actually feels ready. They begin scared, and they figure it out on the way. The people who wait to feel confident, wait to have the full plan, wait until the timing is right, are usually still waiting decades later, wondering where their life went. You will never have more energy, more time to recover, or fewer excuses than you have right now. So he'd ask you the hardest question of all. What would you start today if you fully accepted that you're never going to feel ready, and that starting scared is the only way anyone ever begins? And the 10th lesson is the one Carnegie would save for last, because he'd say it matters more than every dollar he ever made. Decide early what the money is actually for. At the peak of his wealth, he wrote that the man who dies rich dies disgraced, and he gave away almost 90% of his fortune while he was still alive, building libraries and schools that would outlast him by a century. He'd tell his 20-year-old self that chasing money for its own sake is a trap, because no amount ever feels like enough, and people who reach the top with no purpose behind it often find nothing waiting there. The ones who build something that truly lasts are chasing a why bigger than themselves, and the wealth becomes the tool that serves it. So while you're young, he'd urge you to get clear on this. What would you build if the money were only a tool? Who would you become? Who would you lift on your way up? Answer that early, and the money tends to follow a life with meaning. Ignore it, and you can win the whole game and still feel like you lost. So there they are, the 10 lessons Andrew Carnegie would go back and teach you at 20, if he only could. Guard your time like the treasure it is. Master one rare skill. Live below your means while it's easy. Buy your first asset young. Choose the people around you carefully. Protect your reputation from day one. Never stop learning. Take your bold risks now. Stop waiting to feel ready, and decide early what all of it is truly for. He proved that where you start has almost nothing to do with where you finish. That the whole thing is built, first, in the way you think. The difference is, you get to learn these at the beginning, not the end. So tell me in the comments, which lesson do you wish you'd understood sooner? Number 1 or number 10, or the one that stung a little? And if this gave you something real, subscribe and stay close, because next time we go even deeper into the timeless rules the wealthiest people in history quietly lived by. You've got the lessons now, while there's still time to use them. So go build something that's finally yours.